Welcome to Chemistry 101, and over the next 2 semesters, if you decide to take both semesters of general chemistry, we're going to get into a wide array of topics where we'll talk about the material that the universe is made out of and what we can understand about that material and how we can make it useful to us. And so we're going to start out with this introductory chapter where we talk about science in general and how science is done. And we'll talk about experiments. Particularly, that's how we make most of our observation. And then measurements and how we can agree on sets of units and ways of writing down our measurements so that other scientists can understand what we have done. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk a little bit about why we even want to learn chemistry. Chemistry reveals what I like to call, and my undergraduate professor liked to call, the secrets of the universe, but particularly what material is the universe made out of and how are those materials put together to make up everything that we can observe. Once we have some understanding of that, we want to know how we can manipulate those materials for our purposes. Now, what kind of purposes might we have to manipulate materials for? One in particular might be energy storage or control. That's become a major item in the United States and throughout the world over the last several decades as energy becomes a little bit harder to produce each year. And we get to have more and more concerns about the environmental impact of the ways that we normally produce energy. Another issue is how do we know how to make materials or recognize materials that are useful for nutrition or for medicine or for other application? And these are the kinds of questions, among others, that chemists work on and that folks who are literate in chemistry can understand. The question is, how are we as general chemistry students going to go about revealing or answering these questions or revealing these secrets? And so you as a chemistry student, hopefully you are planning to be here every day when we meet in class and to be engaged in listening to and watching and participating in the video material that we place online and just be constantly immersed in these thoughts. I am going to be doing everything I can to make all of our class periods worth attending, in that each of them will help you to grow to be a more and more effective chemistry student, a more and more effective student of understanding the universe. However, just coming to class and just watching these videos is not going to be enough. Understanding, particularly in the sciences, takes time and practice. So I want you to plan to spend time each night in your book, in your notes, on your problems with these videos, and if necessary, extra time with me during my office hours, time with classmates in group study. And what's going to happen is we're going to have some students this semester, hopefully all of you, but at least some, who will start to see connections between what we do in our videos and in the classroom and in the lab and in our textbook and what is going on around them in the world, whether that's through watching the news or things that they observe happening or medicines that they're taking or need to take or that friends or family of theirs need to take. They'll start to see connections between what we study and all of those things, and they'll start to look at the world in the frame of reference of this course and look at this course in the frame of reference of their world. And those kind of students not only will be the most successful in this course, but they'll learn to appreciate the world around them quite a bit more. Now, as people who are studying the sciences, one of the main things we want to get into is learning how to approach science. How do scientists solve problems? And so if someone is approaching a problem from a scientific standpoint, what they're going to do is identify a problem. Now, a problem doesn't necessarily mean something wrong. It could mean something that we just want to understand better. For example, one that is being currently argued in the news quite a bit and shows up in public policy quite a bit is this idea that the Earth or the atmosphere is getting a little bit warmer on average each year and each decade over the last several decades. Um, Someone who lives in a very cold climate area might not see that as a problem, but as the climate changes, the amount of food the earth can produce may change. Certain areas that are very livable right now might become unlivable for several reasons. And so we want to understand why the earth seems to be getting warmer as time passes. And so the scientist will see that the earth is getting warmer, that's an observation, and ask a question. Quite often that question is why or how. In this case, why is the earth getting warmer? And what a scientist will do at that point is propose an answer to his question. We'll call that a hypothesis. It's not just a guess, but it is a guess based on previous knowledge. For example, scientists know that warm objects tend to cool by emitting radiation. So as the earth gets warmer, it's going to emit radiation. And the temperature of the earth causes it to want to emit mostly infrared radiation. Most of our atmosphere is made up of nitrogen and oxygen, which don't absorb infrared radiation, so it's easy for the earth to cool that way. But carbon dioxide, because of the shape of that molecule and the way it can vibrate, does absorb infrared radiation. So the more carbon dioxide that's in the air, the harder it's going to be for the earth to cool. So one hypothesis about why the earth is getting warmer and warmer each year is that we are adding more and more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by burning more and more fossil fuels. Now that is a very educated and well thought out guess that a scientist, several scientists, many scientists in fact, have put forth. The next step then will be to devise experiments to test that hypothesis. And the way a scientist thinks is not by devising experiments intended to prove the hypothesis, because quite often proving hypotheses is impossible, but the idea is to try to define or devise experiments that will disprove the hypothesis. If this experiment comes out a certain way, my hypothesis is definitely wrong and I have to revise my hypothesis. And so that's what's been going on over the last several decades, is scientists devising experiments that are designed to either disprove or to support the hypothesis that global warming is being caused by CO2 being added to the atmosphere, primarily as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, but additionally as a result of our own breathing and the breathing of animals. And the fact that that CO2 generation is going on faster than plants who use CO2 and the ocean who absorb CO2 can keep up. Now, if a scientist is testing a particular hypothesis and an experiment disproves his hypothesis, that scientist needs to rework that hypothesis, revise that hypothesis, change it in some fashion. And so we revise our hypotheses and then we retest them. We revise and retest, we revise and retest, until we reach a point where we have a very well tested hypothesis that passes all of our tests. At that point, we call the hypothesis that has been well tested and well verified a theory or a model that helps us to explain our observations. Doesn't necessarily mean that our theory or our model are 100% true, because theories will be tested and revised as more and more data becomes available, as more and more sensitive equipment is invented. And so scientists are always progressing in that way. But the idea of a theory or a model is that it is some conclusion that we've drawn based on experiment to verify a hypothesis, and that hypothesis helps us predict future experiments, the results of future experiments. And as long as that theory, that well-tested hypothesis, is successful in doing that, it remains a useful theory. Now, as we continue to work as scientists and start to devise experiments to test our hypotheses, we're going to have to begin to be able to make observations of our experiments. Quite often that's going to entail making numerical measurements. And what we want to be able to do as scientists is share our results with other scientists and read the results other scientists have generated, and have those results written out in a way that we can all understand. So scientists have basically, by and large, agreed on a set of units that will serve as the mathematical units that we will use for different kinds of measurements. That way we can each read each other's conclusions, read each other's data, and understand, and that way science grows much, much faster. I read another scientist's work, I come up with new hypotheses and test those hypotheses based on that scientist's work, and then that scientist reads my work and does the same thing, and we each help as science advance. And that will happen much more quickly if we have agreed on how we will measure our numerical observables. So scientists have agreed that the basic unit of mass will be kilograms. It doesn't mean we may weigh everything in kilograms, but it'll usually be in powers of 10 related to kilograms. So we might measure in grams or milligrams or things of that nature. Same thing with length. The agreed upon international unit for length is meters. Small items we might measure in centimeters or millimeters or nanometers. Large items in kilometers. Temperature we agree to measure in Kelvin, and we'll talk about why that's the case. You usually talk about temperatures outside or of your body in Fahrenheit degrees. We'll usually talk about temperature in our thermometers in chemistry class in terms of Celsius degrees, but Kelvin is a much more useful unit because the lowest possible temperature in Kelvin is 0. The scale is built such that there will be no negative temperatures. The agreed upon unit for amount of substance is mole. Chemists use this quite a bit. Time is seconds. We'll talk about electric current a lot more in the second half of this course in Chem 102 than we will in 101, but amps or amperes are the units for electrical current. And then luminous intensity you'll deal with more in a physics course than you would in a chemistry course. This table and the table on the next slide have very important information other than really these last two rows for this course. So you'll want to know all of this material here. And then like I said, on this next slide we have the powers of 10. The ones we use in chemistry class the most that I want you to be concerned with knowing are mega is a million of something. So if we say a megameter, that would be a million meters. Kilo, a kilogram is 1,000 grams, 10 to the third grams. Centi is a hundredth, so there are 100 centimeters in a meter. A centimeter is a hundredth of a meter. A milligram is a thousandth of a gram. Micro and nano also very important in chemistry. The rest of these are good to know, but I wouldn't expect you to have them memorized. Pico seconds, for example, is a very, very small unit of time that someone studying the speeds of reaction might be concerned about. Femto and atto are even smaller units. Exa, peta, tera, these are very large units. We don't use them very often in chemistry. They're not ones that I expect you to have memorized for the purposes of this course. Now quite often we will have units that we use because they come from, they're derived from other units. For example, the unit for area is derived from the square of the unit for length because area is length times length. As chemists, we sometimes like to deal with smaller areas, so we have a smaller unit, centimeters squared. Volume is area times length or length times width times height, so we'll have meters cubed as that unit. Density is mass over volume. Again, as chemists, we like to deal with smaller units, so grams per cubic centimeter. Speed, meters per second rather than miles per hour because we're dealing with metric units. Force is mass times acceleration. The amount of force required to accelerate something is its mass times the amount it's going to be accelerated. So that's kilogram meters per second squared. We take force and divide it by area and we get pressure, the amount of pressure that's against a particular surface. Kilograms per meter second squared. And then energy. is force times distance. Kilogram meter per second squared times meter, so the meter term ends up being squared. And you can see each of these units has its own names named after a particular famous scientist.